Hebrews and our hope for heaven itself. Now the text is Hebrews 9:24. For Christ is not entered into the holy places made with hands, which are the figures of the true, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. I want to give you some background on this. I'm going to be gone the next 2 Sundays. And the reason I'm going to be gone is I've been invited to speak at a lectureship in Lubbock, Texas. So Lori and I are going to pull our little camper out there, and we're going to try to kind of enjoy ourselves coming and going with that camper. And they've got, it's just so neat. They got their parking lot with camper spots. And so you can pull right into their parking lot and get a full hookup on your camper there and stay there during that lectureship. Well, we've been out there before. And, you know, it's nice to be invited. It is really nice when you're invited back. So we get to go back, and they've asked me to speak on this lectureship. This lectureship is about the new heaven and the new earth. Well, what's that talking about? Well, that's found 4 times in the Scriptures. And I'm going to kind of jump around here, but try to follow me on this. The first 2 times it's found is in Isaiah, right at the end of the book of Isaiah, the last 2 chapters. Isaiah 65:17 and Isaiah 66:22. For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former shall not be remembered nor come to mind. And then the other one, Isaiah 66:22. For as the new heavens and new earth which I will make shall remain before me, saith the Lord, so shall your seed and your name remain. What is Isaiah talking about? Well, you lift that right up out of context and you can come up with all kind of explanations. But when we put it in the context of what Isaiah is talking about, he's telling those Israelites, you see how things are now. It's going to be altogether different someday. I'm going to change it all up. And to you, it'll be like a new heaven and a new earth. And he's really talking about the times we live in now, where there's one gospel for all the world, and Jesus has died for all, and we can all live together in one church. That's what he's talking about there in Isaiah. But now it's also found 2 times in the New Testament. And it's found after the things that Isaiah talked about were fulfilled. Well, that was in 2 Peter 3 and verse 13. Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for a new heavens and a new earth, wherein dwelleth righteousness. Peter just talked about how the old heavens and earth are going to be destroyed in fervent heat. But there's going to be a new heavens and a new earth. The other time is in Revelation 21 in verse 1. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. What are they talking about? Well, just as God had plans that would completely change the way Israel viewed the world, God has plans for us. It's going to completely change the way we view things. It'll be a new order of things after this earth has passed away, and God's got something better for us. God's promised us that we can get to heaven. And so that's what those things would be referring to. Now, I'd have to go into much more depth than that, and that's what that entire lectureship is going to be about. They've asked me to speak on this. Here's my assigned topic, okay? Are the Jehovah's Witnesses and Seventh-day Adventists right? All right, that's my topic. That's not a topic I would have chosen. I sent them my manuscript. I did some research, sent them a manuscript, and they got back to me and said, I want you to say more than that. So I thought, well, what else can I say? I thought I covered the subject. So I looked through the program, and looks for gaps. And I don't think they're going to discuss some of these things. I'm just going to put that in since I'm at the end of the program. So I'm going to fill in the gaps right here at the end. And one of those gaps was what it talks about in the book of Hebrews. And so that's why I'm going to bring this lesson. It's kind of getting me ready for that lectureship. And let me tell you what the Jehovah's Witness and Seventh-day Adventists teach. Now, I'm not going to be belittling them or ridiculing them. I don't like to do that. In fact, I talked to them. I called up the local preacher and asked, what is it you believe? And this is how they explained it to me. So, let me just tell you what they teach. The Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Jesus began to rule in heaven in 1914. Now they come up with that by going through all these charts and dates and 70 weeks and things. They come up, it's got to be 1914. He began to rule in heaven in 1914, and he's got 144,000 Jehovah's Witnesses up there to help him do this. And they're going to watch over the earth for all eternity. And when the Lord returns, all of the righteous will be raised from the dead, but they're not going to go to heaven. They're going to stay on earth. And then comes the judgment day. And this one day is going to last for 1,000 years. And during that 1,000 years, one by one, the unrighteous are going to be raised from the dead, and they're going to be judged, but they're not going to be judged by what they do in this life. They're going to be judged based on what they do after they're raised from the dead. And at the end of the 1,000 years, the devil's going to be turned loose. And everyone here is going to be put to the test. And those that remain faithful to Christ through that test, well then, they'll get to stay on the earth forever with the righteous. But the others, if they don't, they're just going to be annihilated. They'll cease to exist. Okay, so that's what the Jehovah's Witnesses teach. Now, the Seventh-day Adventists, they don't teach it that way. They teach it another way. And some of it sounds pretty good. They say, now, when the Lord returns, there's going to be 4 classes of people. There's going to be the righteous that have died. And they'll be raised from the dead and go meet with the Lord in the air. And then there's going to be the righteous that are alive, and they're going to then follow those raised from the dead, and they'll be with the Lord in the air. And then the unrighteous that are dead, they're just going to stay dead. And the unrighteous that are alive, they're going to be put to death. And so they'll all be asleep. They think death means you just go to sleep, and so they'll all be put to sleep. And then Jesus will carry all the righteous into heaven, and we'll be there for 1,000 years. Now, during that time, Satan's going to be confined to the earth. And he's not going to like it, because the earth is not going to be a happy place to live. It's going to be a hard place. And he'll be the only one here, and he'll be so frustrated because he won't have anyone to tempt. All the unrighteous will be dead, and all the righteous will be in heaven, and he'll be by himself just fuming for 1,000 years. But at the end of the 1,000 years, God's going to bring the new Jerusalem down out of heaven, and it's going to land on the earth. And then all of the unrighteous will be raised from the dead, and they're going to try to attack the city. And the Lord's going to send the fire down from heaven, and they'll all be eliminated. They'll cease to exist. They'll just be annihilated. And then God will recreate the earth for the righteous, and they'll get to come out of the city, and they'll stay on the earth forever, for eternity. Now, there's 2 different doctrines there, surely, 2 different explanations of end times. What they have in common is that the righteous will live on the earth for eternity, and the unrighteous will be eliminated. But a lot of other things that don't have that in common. Well, are they right about that? Well, I'm going to talk about that in my lecture. And I'm going to show they're not right, but I don't really want to pick on them. I really want to just show what the Bible teaches. And part of what it teaches is here in the book of Hebrews. You know, it's not enough to come up with some end times theology and theory and say, well, that fits these passages here. It's got to fit them all. And there's some things in Hebrews here it doesn't fit. And it gives us our hope. Hebrews gives us a hope for heaven. And it does it three ways. Number one, the hope in Hebrews is not a hope for heaven on earth. The first chapter, Hebrews chapter 1, 10 and 11. Thou, Lord, in the beginning hast laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of thy hands. They shall perish, but thou remainest, and all that shall wax old as doth a garment, and as a vesture thou shalt fold them up, and they shall be changed, but thou art the same, and thy years fail not. They shall perish. Now there's a figure of speech called an adnation. And it's employed when you're trying to make something look ridiculous. It's kind of a humorous thing. And it's like something that could never come to pass. And one of the common figures of speech of that is this one. When pigs fly, you've heard that. When pigs fly. And people say it doesn't really mean they'll perish. He's just like saying when pigs fly. Well, look at the background on this. What the Hebrew writer is doing is quoting from the 102nd Psalm. And the inscription of this psalm says a prayer the afflicted when he's overwhelmed and poureth forth his complaint before the Lord. And then we have the psalm. Of old thou hast laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of thy hands. They shall perish, but thou shalt endure. Yea, all of them shall wax old like a garment, as a vesture thou shalt change them, and they shall be changed, but thou art the same, and thy years have no end. Now, David's not making a funny here. It's not an adnation. It's a contrast. The earth and the things of the world that God's made, they're going to perish. Contract with God. But God, you will endure. And if the earth is eternal as God is eternal, there'd be nothing there to contrast at all, would they? And so we don't have a hope for things of this earth. Our hope for things in heaven above. And number two, Abraham had that hope. Abraham was looking for an heavenly city. Let me show you what it says about Abraham. Remember how Abraham was called from the Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan. But he was a stranger in the land of Canaan. And God told him in Genesis 17 in verse 8, I will give unto thee and thy seed after thee the land wherein thou art a stranger. This wasn't Abraham's home. And Abraham realized this when Sarah died. I tell you, when you go, when you leave your loved ones in the ground and you walk away, you feel like a stranger in this world. You're ready to move on. And you like that song, I've stayed around this town too long, I feel like traveling on. And we feel like we've just been on this earth long enough. I'm ready to move on. And that's the way Abraham felt. When Sarah died, he bought a cave from the sons of Heth. And he told those sons of Heth as he was buying that cave, I'm a stranger and a sojourner with you. This was not my home. And then in the book of Hebrews, we understand better just what Abraham was thinking. Hebrews 11, 8 through 10. By faith, Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place where he should have to receive for an inheritance, obeyed. He went out not knowing whither he went. By faith, he sojourned in a land of promises in a strange country. A sojourner, that means this isn't your home. You might be here, you're staying here, you're abiding here, but it's not really your home. He sojourned in this land. as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles, that'd be tents, with Isaac and Jacob, with the heirs of him of the same promise. For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. He was looking for something beyond the land of Canaan. And we read about that in Hebrews 11:13 through 14. Those patriarchs, these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For they that say such things declare plainly they seek a better country. And look what Abraham was seeking, the next two verses. Truly, if they'd been mindful of that country whence they came out, they may have had opportunity to have returned. If they wanted to go back to the Ur of Chaldees, they could have done so. But that's not what they were thinking. Now they desire a better country, that is, an heavenly. Wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God. He hath prepared for them a city. Abraham's looking for a heavenly country, a heavenly city. And that word heavenly, it's not the normal word to describe heavenly. When you go back and look it up in the original language, we would say it's epi-heavenly. He's looking for a city above the heavens. Well, one more thing. And that is number 3. The book of Hebrews, it gives us hope for heaven itself. Here's what it says about our hope in Hebrews 10:17 through 20. Lay hold upon the hope set before us, which hope we have as an anchor for the soul, both sure and steadfast, and which entereth into that within the veil, whither the forerunner for us is entered, even Jesus, made an high priest forever. Let me explain this. Jesus, in this imagery and the way the writers talk about it, Jesus is our high priest. What did the high priest do? Well, the high priest once a year would go into the holy place of the temple, and then there would be a veil at one end of the temple. And once a year on the Day of Atonement, he would pass from the holy place through that veil into the most holy place and meet with God at the mercy seat. Now there's a tale that is told, and I haven't verified this, but they say during the days of Jesus, they got to thinking, what if something happened to that high priest while he's in there? What would we do? No one's supposed to go in there but him. And so they'd tie a rope on his foot. And he'd go in there, and that rope would be coming out from the veil, and they could, if anything happened, they could pull him out by the rope. I guess is the way it would be. Well, now compare that to this passage. The anchor of the soul. Have you ever used an anchor when you was out fishing? Or you ever been out at sea and had an anchor? And there's that cable that runs from the vessel down to the anchor. Well, that our hope is in that anchor. You remember when Paul was in that storm and they cast forth anchors and wished for the day. They'd placed all their hope in those anchors. They were holding that ship away from the rocks. But Christ is our hope, like an anchor for the soul. And He's passed through the veil of death. He's on the other side. He's in heaven with His Father. And He maketh intercession for us. Now this imagery of the high priest returns in Hebrews 9 and verse 24. The imagery returns and says, Christ is not entered into the holy places made with hand, which are the figures of the true, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. And so in this imagery, it's not the real temple He's in. This is the figure of how Christ is now in heaven itself for God. Now put those two passages together. He's our forerunner that has entered into this place. A forerunner is one that goes before with the idea that the others will follow. And so Jesus is our forerunner for us, entered into heaven itself. What's that tell you? We're going to follow Jesus into heaven itself. Now that's our hope. We can't put our hope in these earthly things. When you hear these announcements, and you hear those that are suffering, and those that have passed, and the hard things that come on people in this life, and then we experience that ourselves, let all those things remind us that we're strangers here. This is not our home. We've got a home in heaven. That's where our hope is. I tell you what I wish you could do. Wish you could have been with me at the farmer's market yesterday and talked to Larry Kirby. He's not feeling as well as he did. He says, but I'm ready to go. Says that you can get too attached to this world. And I'm ready to go on to heaven. Says, I'm ready for that. I told him, Larry, you are a walking sermon. And he doesn't say this with gloom and doom. He's talking about it with anticipation. And so we've got a hope that's beyond all these things, beyond all the pain and sickness and dying. There lies a summer land of bliss. Now, I want to enjoy that. The righteous will go there. And if I was preaching another sermon, I'd explain how the unrighteous are going into a torment that is eternal. And you don't want to go there. And so it's set before us on what we will choose. We need to choose Christ. We need to decide, I'm going to be a follower of Him. I'm going to follow Him all the way to heaven. I'll turn from my sins. I'll confess my faith before men. I'll be baptized into Christ. And I'll live faithful to Him all the days of my life. And then follow Him where He goes. If you need to do that, then you're invited to do it this morning as we sing the invitation song.